A candidate in New York, a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, has won her primary in a stunning upset.
You're talking about ICE should be abolished, you want government jobs, guarantee government jobs. What do you say to people who say that this is just too much?
Well, I think what we've seen is that working class Americans want a clear champion, and there is nothing radical about moral clarity.
The DSA, as it is known, believes in the abolition of capitalism in favor of an economy run by the workers or the state. Of course, this is only a primary, but make no mistake, this win is being heralded as the start of a movement.
She has a message that the Democrats have not had.
She came out of nowhere, and it is a message that people on Washington are already waking up and taking the note.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a sign. She is not, I think she's not an anomaly. She is not a glitch. She is a feature of a fight to come within the Democratic Party.
So disdain for corporations and capitalism appears to be gaining traction in some ways in America. According to recent polling, just 42% of young people support the idea of capitalism, and socialism gets 33% among young voters. Earlier tonight, I spoke with Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire. What do you make of this? Is it an anomaly, or do you think this is a movement?
No, I do think this is a movement. I think the next wave of Democrats are going to be much closer to Bernie Sanders brand Democrats than even Nancy Pelosi brand Democrats. And what you see here is the sort of howling at the moon branch of the Democratic Party, in which they throw out whatever radical proposal they want and then suggest that this is truly authentic, that moral clarity lies in making proposals that are completely untenable, that will never be paid for. This person was on MSNBC this morning, and she was asked specifically about how she'd pay for all of this, and she proceeded to blab for a solid 2 minutes without giving an answer to that question, because she doesn't have a way of paying for any of this. But, of course, the Democratic base has decided that it is much more important to have somebody who is virtue signaling about why everybody should have a government job and why housing should be government provided than to actually have candidates who have policies that can never be implemented.
Yeah, she was talking about President Trump also earlier on MSNBC and calling him a authoritarian hyper-capitalist is the way that she termed him. And, when you look back, let's look back at this shot from President Trump, and the difference in President Obama is how they approach capitalism.
If you got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
Nobody's cut regulations like we have. Nobody's created tax cuts like we have.
I mean, there can't be sharper voices that are more different on this issue than we've had in the last two presidents, Ben.
No question. But and I think that's what the Democrats are picking on, is the fact that the Democrats have always been moving in this direction, or at least they have been significantly in the past 8 years. There's a reason Bernie Sanders came very close to knocking off Hillary Clinton in primaries, and it is pathetic to say that a near octogenarian is the wave of the future, but I think that Bernie Sanders has a lot more acolytes among the under 30 crowd than Hillary Clinton ever did, and this is pretty good proof of that.
I thought this was, particularly ironic. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who I think is a genius. I thought Hamilton was wonderful, but I think it's interesting that someone who essentially wrote a musical that is a love letter to the founding fathers and to the Federalist Papers and to Alexander Hamilton is applauding. He's saying, congratulations to you. For this woman who is essentially, not essentially, she's put herself out there as a socialist. What do you make of that?
Yeah. And, she's as radical as can be. But again, it is very easy to virtue signal about policies that have no impact when they're never implemented. Yeah. Bernie Sanders never did anything in the Senate until he ran for president. And I highly doubt that any of the policies that are espoused by Ocasio-Sanchez are really going to result in anything real here, because it's easy to go home and say that big government's going to solve all your problems. When it comes time to hash out the actual legislation, it's going to be pretty difficult to get that stuff passed. So the Democrats, who are so all-fired eager about the new wave of the Democratic future, they may find that this is not in the mainstream. This is a New York district. It has been a Democratic district for 20-odd years. I mean, longer than that. But the person she replaced had been a 10-term congressperson. So it's not as though winning a Democratic primary means you're the wave of the future all across America. It means you want a Democratic Party in New York, for goodness sake.
Yeah, well, Joe Crowley didn't show up for the debate. He might be rethinking that at this point. I have about a minute left with you, Ben, and I do want to ask you your reaction to the huge news today, the resignation of Justice Kennedy, and what you think.
I mean, it's just astonishing, obviously. I was really not expecting that Justice Kennedy would step down, given that he's the swing vote. And it gives President Trump an enormous opportunity to remake the court in a conservative constitutionalist image for a full generation, which is, again, President Trump has been both lucky and good. And he has an opportunity now that he's been lucky to be good again here.
Yeah, well, I know you, well, maybe you didn't suggest yourself, but you did suggest.
Hey, I'll take it. If I'm nominated, I'll take it. Come on.
Why not, right? You have nothing else to do.
The confirmation hearings would be lit.
Exactly, they would be. I think it was Ann Coulter who first suggested back when you were 21, when you were a law student at Harvard, that you would actually make an excellent Supreme Court justice. And as you pointed out today, you'd have a pretty good long run at it, most likely.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe there for a solid 60 years. So, Mr. President, if you're looking for somebody who's going to have several decades on the court, longer than anybody else you're looking at, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And if not, I'll just cry myself to sleep.
You know what?
It'll be all right.
My Twitter feed is just flowing right now with people who are just jumping on board. Thank you so much, Ben. It's always great to see you. Thanks so much.
Good to see you. When we talk about the radical move to the left by the Democratic Party, it is obvious from yesterday's elections that this is the case. So yesterday, a guy named Joseph Crowley was ousted. He was expected to challenge Nancy Pelosi for the speakership. So how old is the Democratic Party? Nancy Pelosi is 78 years old. Joe Crowley, who is 58 years old, right, is just slightly younger than my dad. Joe Crowley was seen as the heir apparent to Nancy Pelosi. So he was the up-and-comer. He was the fresh face, the 58-year-old. Well, he was ousted yesterday in a Democratic primary by a woman named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's 28, a first-time candidate, and an open member of the Democratic Socialists of America. So she's a Bernie Sanders socialist. And she is a former bartender. She was bartending until about 5 minutes ago. She's a graduate of Boston College, or Boston University, rather, in 2011. And she is wildly to the left. When I say she's a leftist, I mean she is an insane leftist. Not only does she believe that Israel is genocidal, she also favors Medicare for all, abolishing immigration and customs enforcement. She suggests that there should be a job for everyone provided by the government. She believes that there should be a minimum wage of $15. She says, quote, when it comes to power, we can't just be tempted by power and money alone. What we need to do is be bold enough and courageous enough to choose leadership that takes no corporate money and advances healthcare, education, and housing for all. So this is another one of her programs, is housing for all. So she is a full-scale redistributive socialist. And she's really, really radical. The reason that she won in the district is because nobody came out to vote. Only 5% of registered voters, eligible voters in this district, actually voted in this primary. It was on a really weird day. There were only a grand total of about 27,000 votes in the primary total. She won about 17,000 of those. Also, Joe Crowley did not take his district particularly seriously. He'd won 10 consecutive terms, so he didn't spend any time in that district. Nonetheless, this is the dawning of a new era for the Democratic Party. They've fully embraced Bernie Sanders socialism and Maxine Waters nuttiness. Here is this new hero of the Democratic Party, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Here she was today after winning the primary. She'll win the general, too, because this is a heavily Democratic district, claiming that ICE, right, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is running black sites on the border. Black sites being like CIA sites set up in Jordan to torture people. She thinks that's what's happening on the American border because she's a crazy person.
I think that ICE is right there as a part of it. It has its extrajudicial nature is baked in to the structure of the agency, and that is why they're able to get away with black sites at our border, with the separation of children. We are committing human rights abuses on this border and separating children from their families.
Okay, so one of the reasons that Joe Crowley lost this election also, number one, he wasn't radical enough for the district, but number two, one of the things that's been happening in his district is that it's moved to a now majority-minority district. It's a heavily Hispanic district, and he was one of the last remaining Democrats living in a heavily minority district who was a white guy. So there's been a real shift in racial demographics in this particular district, and that was reflected in this election as well. She is a deep radical, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She will be treated as an up-and-comer. She'll be treated as the new heroine of the left, of course, because she's a pretty young woman, obviously, and also she is talented at what she does. So, I mean, she's a good face for the Democratic Party if you like socialism. If socialism is your thing, she's a much more attractive candidate on every possible level than Joe Crowley, except for the fact that she is a radical, insane person. So here she is talking some more in a debate about ICE and trying to go after Joe Crowley's folks, trying to suggest that Joe Crowley is not extreme enough on ICE.
If this organization is as fascist as you have called it,
I've said it's fascist.
And you have said it's fascist, then why don't you adopt the stance to eliminate it? This is a moral problem, and your response has been to apply more paperwork to this situation, to have ICE collect more information on immigrants, and that puts our communities in danger, and it also conveys a profound misunderstanding of how we should be approaching this problem.
She wasn't the only radical who was elected last night. Ben Jealous, who's the former head of the NAACP, won Maryland's Democratic primary for governor on Tuesday, and he promised to deliver an agenda that makes college free, legalizes marijuana, and raises the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour. So the Bernie Sanders full-on Medicare for all, legalized marijuana, raising the state's minimum wage. I don't care about the legalizing marijuana all that much, but making college free and raising the state minimum wage, all of this stuff is really radical stuff. And you're seeing a significant move, a really heavy move toward the far left